Did you know that one of the most terrifying monsters in 1950s horror wasn't created with wires or puppets, but with actual stop-motion animation that took weeks to film just seconds of footage? Fiend Without a Face shocked audiences in 1958 with creatures so disturbing that some countries banned the film entirely. What looked like simple science fiction was actually a groundbreaking technical achievement that pushed the boundaries of what horror could show on screen. The invisible brain creatures that crawl, leap, and attack weren't just scary, they were revolutionary. Behind every terrifying moment was a team of artists working in cold studios, moving tiny models millimeter by millimeter, creating nightmares frame by frame. This wasn't just another monster movie, it was a film that dared to show what others only suggested, and it paid the price with censors, bans, and controversy. But it also earned something else, a place in horror history that still sends chills down spines today. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Fiend Without a Face. Number 20. The monster that took 6 months to build the brain creatures in Fiend Without a Face weren't rubber masks or simple puppets. They were intricate stop-motion models that took animator Florenz von Nordhoff and his small team over 6 months to perfect. Each fiend was carefully sculpted to look like a human brain with a spinal cord tail and 2 antennae like stalks. The team built multiple versions of different sizes to create the illusion of perspective and distance. Every single model had to be flexible enough to move, but sturdy enough to hold position between frames. The spinal cord tails were especially tricky. They needed to whip and coil like real vertebrae while supporting the weight of the brain portion. Von Nordhoff tested dozens of materials before finding the right combination of wire, latex, and clay. The antennae stalks were made from thin metal rods covered in painted rubber so they could wave and twitch as the creatures moved. Each brain had individual details, veins, folds, and textures painted by hand under magnifying glasses. The team created 8 complete models, knowing some would be damaged during the intense filming process. They also built several stunt versions that could be destroyed for death scenes without ruining the hero models. Testing the movement took weeks. The creatures needed to look organic, not mechanical. They had to crawl, leap, and attach to victims in ways that felt genuinely alive and threatening. What looked like seconds of smooth creature movement on screen represented days of painstaking work in the studio. Old-fashioned craftsmanship made modern nightmares real. Number 19. The film that got banned in 3 countries. When Fiend Without a Face premiered in 1958, censors around the world weren't ready for what they saw. The film's climax showed the brain creatures being shot, exploding in graphic detail with visible gore that was shocking for the era. Britain's film board demanded cuts before allowing the movie to screen, removing several seconds of the most explicit creature deaths. In Finland, censors banned the film completely, declaring it too disturbing for public viewing. Australia followed suit, refusing to grant the movie a certificate for theatrical release. Even in America, some local censors required edits before the film could play in their cities. What made censors so uncomfortable wasn't just the violence, it was how realistic it looked. Previous monster movies showed creatures falling down or disappearing in shadows when defeated. This film showed them bursting apart with spurting fluids and exposed innards. The special effects team had created the brain explosions using balloons filled with various liquids and solid materials. When popped by air jets or small charges, they sprayed in all directions, creating shockingly convincing gore. For 1958 audiences, this level of graphic detail was unprecedented in a mainstream film. The banned screenings actually helped the movie's reputation. Forbidden fruit tastes sweeter, and audiences in countries where the film did play flocked to see what all the controversy was about. Newspapers ran stories about the shocking content, giving the low-budget film publicity money couldn't buy. The distributor even used the bans in advertising, promoting it as the film too terrifying to show. What censors tried to suppress became the movie's greatest selling point. Prohibition created curiosity. and curiosity filled theaters. Number 18. The director who hated horror movies, Arthur Crabtree, the director of Fiend Without a Face, never wanted to make horror films. He started his career as a cinematographer in Britain during the 1930s, working on prestige dramas and literary adaptations. He loved beautiful lighting, elegant camera moves, and sophisticated storytelling. When he transitioned to directing, he made romantic comedies and costume dramas, anything but monsters and mayhem. By the late 1950s, his career had stalled, and work was scarce. When producer John Croydon offered him Fiend Without a Face, Crabtree needed the paycheck. He took the job reluctantly, viewing it as beneath his talents. But something unexpected happened during production. Crabtree discovered that horror allowed him to use lighting and atmosphere in ways drama never did. The invisible creatures meant he could build suspense through shadows, camera angles, and sound, rather than showing everything directly. He brought his cinematographer's eye to every frame, creating compositions that elevated the B-movie material. The scene where the creatures first become visible is lit like a nightmare painting, stark contrasts, deep shadows, and strategic highlights that make the models look more real than simple bright lighting ever could. Crabtree blocked scenes with precision, using foreground elements and depth of field to create unease. He treated the ridiculous premise with absolute seriousness, directing the actors to play genuine fear rather than camp. His refusal to wink at the audience made the film work. After release, Crabtree admitted in an interview that he'd actually enjoyed making the picture, though he never directed another horror film. What started as desperation became unexpected artistry. Number 17. The sound that made audiences scream. The attack sound of the brain creatures became one of the film's most memorable and disturbing elements. Sound designer Roy Ashton needed to create a noise that suggested something wet, alive, and utterly alien. He experimented with dozens of combinations before finding the perfect mix. The bass sound came from a damp leather glove being twisted and wrung out near a sensitive microphone. This created a squelching, organic texture. Over this, Ashton layered the sound of wet fabric being pulled apart slowly, adding a tearing quality. He then recorded himself and several crew members making guttural breathing sounds, not quite human, but recognizable enough to be unsettling. These elements were mixed together and then played at slightly different speeds to create variations. The final touch was a high-pitched whine created by running a wet finger around the rim of a crystal glass. This added an almost ultrasonic edge that audiences felt more than heard. When the sounds played during test screenings, people visibly reacted, flinching, grimacing, some even covering their ears during the intense attack sequences. The combination of visual and audio created a sensory assault that made the creatures feel genuinely threatening despite their strange appearance. Ashton also created distinct sounds for different actions: a slithering noise for crawling movement, a wet smacking sound for attachment, and various death gurgles when the creatures were killed. Each sound was carefully synchronized to the stop-motion animation, making the creatures feel more alive. Modern horror films use digital sound libraries, but Ashton worked with real objects, real recordings, and real creativity. Simple materials created complex nightmares. Number 16. The actor who refused to touch the props, Marshall Thompson, the film's American star, was brought in specifically to appeal to United States audiences for what was primarily a British production. He played Major Cummings, the heroic atomic researcher investigating mysterious deaths. Thompson was a professional who'd worked in Hollywood for years, but he had one unusual quirk on this production: he absolutely refused to handle the brain creature props. Even though the models used in close-ups with actors were just painted rubber and wire, Thompson found them deeply disturbing. Between takes, he would immediately move away from any creature prop placed near him. During scenes where his character examines a dead fiend, the prop department had to position the model, shoot the scene, and quickly remove it the moment the director called cut. Thompson's wife visited the set one day and saw the creature models laid out on a work table. She later told the director they gave her nightmares for a week. Thompson admitted he understood why. Something about the brain design triggered instinctive revulsion. The prop makers had actually done their job too well. They'd created something that looked organic and wrong simultaneously, hitting a deep psychological nerve. The director worked around Thompson's aversion by using camera angles that suggested interaction without requiring the actor to actually handle the props. In wide shots, the stop-motion animated creatures were used, so Thompson never touched them anyway. For necessary close contact, the effects team developed a technique using wires and rods operated just outside the frame, keeping the actual models away from the actor. Thompson's professionalism meant audiences never noticed his discomfort. On screen, he appears completely committed to fighting the creatures. What looked like brave confrontation was actually careful choreography designed to respect an actor's genuine unease. Number 15. The location that was actually two places. The film is set at a United States Air Force base in Canada, but the production never went anywhere near North America. The entire movie was shot in England using two completely different locations that were edited together to appear as one setting. The exterior base shots were filmed at a decommissioned Royal Air Force airfield in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey. The production rented the facility for 3 weeks, dressing it with American signage, flags, and props to disguise its British origins. Military vehicles were borrowed from a collector who specialized in World War II equipment, then painted with United States markings. The production couldn't afford to keep the outdoor location for the entire shoot, so all interior scenes were filmed weeks later at Shepperton Studios about 15 miles away. The continuity department faced a nightmare matching the two locations. Weather in England changed constantly, so exterior scenes shot days apart had different lighting and sky conditions. The editor had to carefully select takes that could be cut together without obvious mismatches. Some scenes show characters exiting buildings in sunshine and entering interiors that were clearly filmed on overcast days, but the pacing and tension hide the inconsistencies. The nearby town scenes were filmed in various locations around Surrey, none of which looked particularly Canadian. The production simply hoped audiences wouldn't notice or care about geographical accuracy. British cars occasionally appear in distant backgrounds, and careful viewers can spot very English architecture in establishing shots. The local pub where several scenes take place is obviously British in every detail. The production didn't even try to redress it convincingly. But the monster action was exciting enough that most viewers never questioned the setting. Movie magic made 2 English locations become 1 Canadian base. Number 14. The secret inspiration from a comic book writer, Herbert J. Leader, based his screenplay on a short story by Amelia Reynolds Long, but the visual design of the creatures came from an unexpected source, a 1940s horror comic book. Production designer John Elphick was brainstorming creature concepts when he remembered a comic story he'd read years earlier featuring disembodied brains that attacked people. He couldn't recall the specific title, but the image had stuck with him. Brains with trailing spinal cords moving with alien intelligence. Elphick sketched his memories of that comic book creature, adding his own details like the antennae stalks and textured surface. He showed the designs to director Crabtree, who approved immediately. The design perfectly captured the film's premise: intelligence divorced from humanity, pure thought made predatory and monstrous. No one on the production team knew they were essentially adapting a forgotten comic book visual into live-action cinema. The original comic artist was never credited or compensated because no one realized the connection. Elphick believed his memory had simply inspired an original design. Decades later, comic book historians identified the likely source, a story from Weird Tales or a similar 1940s anthology that featured brain creatures remarkably similar to the film's fiends. The comic itself is now lost, with no complete copies known to exist. The film creatures may be the only surviving visual record of that original artistic vision. What seemed like original movie design was actually preservation of forgotten illustration. One artist's work lived on through another's memory, transformed from ink on paper to stop-motion models. The past echoed forward in unexpected ways. Number 13. The actress who performed her own stunts. Kim Parker played Barbara Griselle, one of the primary female characters who faces multiple creature attacks. Parker was a relatively unknown British actress who'd done mostly stage work before this film. When the script called for her character to be knocked down and dragged by the invisible creatures, the production planned to use a stunt double for safety. Parker insisted on doing the scenes herself. She'd done physical theater and felt confident handling the action. The effects team rigged a system using wires attached to a harness hidden under her costume. On cue, crew members would pull the wires, yanking Parker backward or sideways to simulate creature attacks. The technique was simple, but brutal. Parker was actually jerked off her feet and pulled across floors with real force. During one take, she was pulled so hard she slammed into a piece of furniture, bruising her shoulder badly. She refused to stop filming. Between takes, crew members expressed concern, but Parker waved them off. She wanted her performance to look genuinely violent and frightening, and she knew careful stunt work would look too controlled. In the scene where her character is dragged screaming across a room, that's Parker being actually hauled across the floor by stagehands pulling wires with real strength. Her screams weren't entirely acting, she was genuinely being thrown around. The physical commitment shows on screen. Her terror looks authentic because the experience was actually frightening and painful. Modern productions would never allow such dangerous conditions, but 1950s filmmaking operated under different rules. Parker's dedication resulted in some of the film's most visceral moments. Real pain created real reactions. Number 12. The power drain that nearly shut down production. The climactic sequence where the brain creatures become visible and attack en masse required intense lighting to make the stop-motion animation read clearly on film. Cinematographer Lionel Baines designed a lighting setup using over 40 individual lamps focused on the creature models and set. When the lighting crew powered everything on for the first camera test, they overloaded Shepperton Studios' electrical system. Circuit breakers tripped, plunging not just the Fiend Without a Face set into darkness, but 3 other sound stages where different productions were filming. Studio electricians rushed to restore power, believing they'd experienced a random failure. When Baines's crew powered up again to continue testing, the entire system crashed again. The studio supervisor arrived, furious that one production was disrupting everyone else's work. Baines explained the lighting requirements. Without massive illumination, the stop-motion photography wouldn't work. The studio faced a choice: let the production continue and risk constant disruptions, or force them to reduce lighting and potentially ruin the film's most important sequence. The solution came from an unlikely source. A veteran electrician suggested running dedicated power lines from a different building, bypassing the main studio grid. Over 2 days, electricians ran heavy cables from a nearby facility, creating an independent power source just for the creature sequence. The work delayed filming and added unexpected cost, but it solved the problem. When shooting resumed, Baines had all the light he needed without affecting other productions. The intensity of illumination created the stark, harsh look of the climax, creatures standing out against deep shadows with almost surgical clarity. What could have been a disaster became a distinctive visual style. Problem-solving created accidental artistry. Number 11. The liquid that wasn't special effects. When the brain creatures are shot and burst apart, they spray liquid in violent spurts that shocked 1950s audiences. Viewers assumed the effect used trick photography or hidden tubes, but the technique was surprisingly direct and simple. Special effects supervisor Peter Nielsen filled thin rubber bladders with a mixture of condensed milk, chocolate syrup, and water to create a convincingly organic-looking fluid. The bladders were placed inside the creature models at strategic points. Small explosive charges, called squibs, were planted next to the bladders. When detonated by electrical current, the squibs ruptured the bladders, causing the liquid to spray out through pre-cut holes in the latex creature skin. The effect was filmed at high speed to make the explosions look more dramatic when played back at normal speed. During filming, the set became absolutely covered with the sticky mixture. After each take, crew members had to clean the walls, floor, and any furniture in range before resetting for another explosion. The smell of sour milk combined with chocolate became overwhelming in the enclosed soundstage. Some crew members wore cloths over their noses between takes. The actors in the scene had to stand remarkably close to the exploding models to make the framing work. Marshall Thompson received several direct hits from the spraying liquid during multiple takes. He later joked that he'd been slimed before it was fashionable. The practical, messy approach created results that still look convincing decades later. There's a physical reality to the spurting fluids that digital effects sometimes lack. What you see is what actually happened. Real explosions, real liquids, real mess. Authentic chaos created authentic horror. Number 10. The voice nobody noticed was missing throughout most of the film. The brain creatures are completely silent except for their attack sounds. But in early script drafts, writer Herbert J. Leader had written dialogue for the Fiends. The creatures were supposed to communicate telepathically with the human characters, speaking directly into their minds with creepy, echoing voices. Director Arthur Crabtree filmed several scenes with actors reacting to scripted telepathic messages, planning to add the creature voices in post-production. Sound designer Roy Ashton recorded multiple actors speaking the alien dialogue with electronic distortion and reverb effects. The production team assembled a rough cut of the climax with the creature voices included. When they screened it for a small test audience, the response was unexpectedly negative. The voices made the creatures seem less frightening and more silly. Giving them recognizable speech humanized them in ways that reduced their alien menace. The creatures became more disturbing when they remained incomprehensible and utterly other. Crabtree made the bold decision to remove all the planned creature dialogue, leaving only their attack sounds. This required re-editing several scenes and cutting some moments that now made no sense without the telepathic communication. But the result was a vastly more effective film. The silent, relentless creatures became pure nightmare fuel, attacking without warning, reason, or mercy. Their silence made them more monstrous than any dialogue could. The editing change meant that hours of recorded voice work and several filmed reaction scenes were completely abandoned. In the final film, characters never receive telepathic messages or communicate with the creatures in any way. The fiends are simply threats to be survived, not beings to be understood. What seemed like a good idea in script form failed in execution. Subtraction proved more powerful than addition. Number 9. The scientist who inspired the plot. The film's premise about thought energy becoming physical and deadly seems like pure science fiction, but writer Herbert J. Leader actually based elements on the work of a real researcher. During the 1940s and 1950s, neuroscientist John Carew Eccles was conducting groundbreaking research on how brain cells generate electrical signals. His work suggested that human thought literally produced measurable electromagnetic energy. Science magazines featured articles about Eccles's research, speculating about possible implications. Could thought energy be harnessed? Could it exist independently of the brain producing it? These questions fascinated Leader, who began imagining a horror scenario built on extreme extrapolation of the science. In Leader's script, a scientist's experiments with atomic radiation accidentally amplify thought energy to impossible levels, causing thoughts to materialize as living creatures. It's absurd science, but it's rooted in genuine research that 1950s audiences might have read about. The film's pseudoscientific explanations reference real concepts like electromagnetic fields, neural impulses, and energy transmission. This thin veneer of plausibility helped audiences suspend disbelief. The monster wasn't just random. It emerged from twisted science that sounded almost reasonable. Eccles himself never saw the film or knew his research had inspired a horror movie. He continued his legitimate neuroscience work, eventually winning the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1963 for his discoveries about the ionic mechanisms of nerve cell communication. His real achievements far outpaced the fictional horrors inspired by his early work. The movie took his science and asked what if, in the most extreme way possible. Real research sparked imaginary terror. Number 8. The ending that was completely rewritten. The original screenplay ended very differently from the final film. In Leader's first draft, the brain creatures couldn't be killed. They were pure thought energy that would simply reform after being destroyed. The heroes realized their only option was to shut down the atomic reactor that was amplifying the creator's thought patterns. The climax involved a desperate race to the reactor facility while creatures swarmed around them. Major Cummings had to manually disable the reactor, knowing the process would release lethal radiation that would kill him. In a tragic final scene, he succeeded in stopping the creatures but died from radiation exposure moments later. The female lead survived to mourn him as military personnel arrived too late to help. The script ended on a downbeat note about the cost of heroism and the dangers of atomic power. Producer John Croydon read this ending and immediately demanded changes. British and American audiences in 1958 wanted clear victories in their horror films, not depressing sacrifices. Croydon insisted the hero survive and the creatures be definitively defeated. He also worried that an anti-atomic power message might limit the film's bookings in America during the height of the Cold War. Leader reluctantly wrote a new ending where shooting the creatures actually killed them permanently, and the reactor could be safely shut down without lethal radiation exposure. The hero and heroine both survived to embrace in the final shot. Crabtree filmed this revised ending, but he also quietly shot some footage of the original tragic conclusion without telling Croydon. When editing began, Crabtree tried assembling the film with the dark ending, showing it only to the editor. They both agreed the original version was more powerful and thematically consistent, but they also knew Croydon would never approve it. The optimistic ending made the final cut. Somewhere in a film archive might exist footage of the tragic conclusion that audiences never saw. Number 7. The prop that became worth thousands. During filming, the special effects department built 8 hero brain creature models for the stop-motion animation sequences. These models were elaborate pieces, each taking weeks to construct and detail. After production wrapped, most props and set pieces were discarded or destroyed according to standard practice. The creature models, however, were carefully packed and stored by effects supervisor Peter Nielsen. He couldn't bring himself to throw away something his team had worked so hard to create. Nielsen kept the models in his garage for years, occasionally showing them to friends and colleagues as examples of his work. In the 1980s, as horror film collecting became popular, a memorabilia dealer heard about the surviving creatures and contacted Nielsen. By then retired and needing money, Nielsen sold 6 of the 8 models to various collectors. He kept 2 for himself as career mementos. Over the following decades, as Fiend Without a Face gained cult status, the creature models became highly sought-after pieces of horror memorabilia. In the 2000s, one model appeared at auction and sold for over $15,000. Another was purchased by a special effects museum for a reported $20,000. The models Nielsen kept until his death in 2003 were inherited by his daughter, who eventually sold them through a specialty auction house. Each fetched prices exceeding $30,000 from collectors around the world. Props that were built for a low-budget film with minimal resources had become valuable pieces of cinema history. The crude materials, wire, latex, clay, and paint, weren't valuable, but the artistry and history they represented were priceless. What was almost thrown away became worth more than anyone imagined. Someone's career memories became other people's treasured artifacts. Number 6. The music nobody remembers recording the film's dramatic musical score was composed by Buxton Orr, a British composer who worked primarily in theater and radio. Orr was hired late in production when the original composer dropped out due to scheduling conflicts. He had less than 3 weeks to compose, orchestrate, and record the entire score. Working nearly around the clock, Orr wrote music that ranged from suspenseful atmospheric pieces to dramatic action cues for the creature attacks. The score was recorded in a single marathon session at a small London studio with a 20-piece orchestra. Musicians were booked for a full day, and Orr conducted them through piece after piece with minimal breaks. The session began at 9 in the morning and didn't finish until nearly midnight. By the final cues, musicians were exhausted, playing on pure professionalism. The recording engineer later said it was one of the most intense sessions he'd ever supervised. Despite the rushed circumstances, Orr created effective music that enhanced the film's tension. His main theme used dissonant strings and low brass to create unease. Attack sequences featured sharp, staccato bursts of percussion and brass that punctuated the violence. Quieter scenes used sustained string tones that suggested something lurking just out of sight. After completing the score, Orr moved on to other projects and rarely mentioned Fiend Without a Face in later interviews. He considered it a minor work compared to his theatrical compositions. When he died in 1997, his obituaries focused on his concert music and theater work, not mentioning the film score at all. Yet his music remains an integral part of the movie's effectiveness. Modern viewers might not consciously notice the score, but they feel its impact. Forgotten work still does its job decades later. Number 5. The scene that used real fear. In the sequence where the creatures first become visible to the characters, actress Terry Kilburn, who played a scientist named Howard Cameron, had an unusually genuine reaction. The scene was filmed with Kilburn sitting at a desk, looking off camera at where a creature model would later be added through optical effects. Director Crabtree wanted an expression of absolute shock and terror. He tried multiple takes, but Kilburn's reactions looked too controlled, too acted. Between setups, Crabtree had a quiet conversation with special effects supervisor Peter Nielsen. When filming resumed, Crabtree called action and gave Kilburn a line of dialogue to deliver. As the actor spoke, Nielsen, standing just outside camera range, threw one of the creature models directly at Kilburn's face without warning. The actor's reaction was explosive and completely authentic. His face registered genuine shock, fear, and revulsion in a split second. He jerked backward so violently he nearly fell out of his chair. Crabtree immediately called cut and pronounced the take perfect. Kilburn was furious, shouting at Crabtree and Nielsen for the dangerous stunt. The creature model had struck him in the cheek, and while it wasn't heavy enough to cause injury, the surprise and the feeling of the thing hitting his face genuinely traumatized him. He refused to speak to the director for the rest of the day. But when Kilburn saw the scene in the final film, he had to admit it worked better than any of his prepared performances. His reaction looked absolutely real because it was absolutely real. The moment became one of the film's most effective scares. Crabtree never apologized for the trick, considering it justified by the results. Modern film ethics would never allow such treatment of actors. Terror was manufactured through actual terror. Number 4. The costume that hit a medical problem. Marshall Thompson, the film's American star, wore his military costume throughout most of the production. The wardrobe department fitted him with a United States Air Force officer's uniform that looked crisp and official on camera. What audiences never knew was that the costume was specifically designed to hide Thompson's medical condition. The actor suffered from severe eczema on his neck and upper chest, a condition that flared during the stress of filming. The production's makeup department tried covering the affected areas with cosmetics, but the hot studio lights made the condition worse. The thick makeup would run or crack during takes, requiring constant touch-ups that slowed filming. The wardrobe supervisor worked with the director to ensure Thompson's costume always included a high-collared shirt buttoned to the neck, even in scenes where such formality might seem unusual. when other actors in the same scenes wore open-collared casual shirts. Thompson remained formally buttoned up. Some viewers have noticed this oddity when watching carefully, but most accept it as the character's personality trait. Thompson was deeply self-conscious about his condition and grateful for the crew's discretion in problem-solving. In a later interview, he mentioned that skin problems had plagued his entire career, forcing costume designers to work around affected areas. He praised the Fiend Without a Face team for handling the situation professionally and without making him feel embarrassed. The condition occasionally affected his comfort during long shooting days. The tight collar in hot studio conditions made him sweat, which irritated the eczema further, creating a painful cycle. But Thompson never complained on set, maintaining his professional demeanor regardless of physical discomfort. What looked like a simple costume choice was actually thoughtful accommodation for a performer's private struggle. Number 3. The alternative cut that played in different countries. Most viewers don't realize that Fiend Without a Face exists in multiple versions with significant differences. The version shown in British theaters was approximately 4 minutes shorter than the American release. British censors required cuts to the most graphic creature death scenes, reducing the amount of time exploding brains were visible on screen. Several shots of spurting liquids were trimmed or removed entirely. A scene showing a creature attaching to a victim's head was shortened considerably. The American version, while still edited for content by modern standards, retained more of the violent imagery. But in Germany, a completely different cut played that was actually longer than both other versions. The German distributor added a prologue sequence that didn't appear in any other country's release. This prologue showed a mysterious scientific experiment going wrong in abstract, symbolic imagery, flashing lights, swirling energy effects, and dramatic music. The sequence lasted nearly 3 minutes and attempted to provide additional context for the creature creation. However, it was filmed by a completely different crew without involvement from the original filmmakers. Director Arthur Crabtree never saw this German prologue until decades later, and he disliked it intensely, feeling it undermined the film's carefully built mystery. The various international versions also featured different title sequences. Some countries used elaborate graphic designs, while others had simple text cards. In France, the film was titled Les Creatures Invisibles and featured a unique animated title sequence created specifically for that market. For decades, film historians struggled to determine which version represented the director's true vision. Modern restorations have generally used the longest surviving cut, combining elements from different versions. The definitive version is actually a reconstruction that never played in any theater during the original release. The film exists in multiple forms, each slightly different from the others. Number 2. The actor who never knew his scene was cut British character actor Kynaston Reeves, filmed an important scene as a scientist who provides crucial exposition about the brain creatures. His character appeared in the middle section of the film, explaining the theoretical science behind the manifestations in a laboratory setting. Reeves worked for 3 days on the production, filming multiple takes of his dialogue-heavy scene. Director Crabtree seemed pleased with the performance, thanking Reeves warmly when his work was completed. The scene was approximately 6 minutes long and included complex scientific jargon that Reeves had carefully rehearsed. When the film was assembled in rough cut, however, the pacing problems became apparent. The movie dragged in the middle section, losing momentum between creature attacks. Crabtree and the editor analyzed the problem and realized that Reeves's exposition scene, while well performed, stalled the narrative completely. The information he provided wasn't essential to understanding the plot. Audiences could follow the story without the detailed scientific explanation. In a difficult decision, Crabtree cut the entire scene from the film. Reeves was never informed. The actor attended the film's London premiere, excited to see his work on the big screen. He sat through the entire movie waiting for his scene to appear. It never did. After the screening, Reeves approached the director, confused and upset. Crabtree apologized, explaining the editing decision. He assured Reeves that the performance was excellent, but the film's pacing required the cut. Reeves was a professional who understood such decisions intellectually, but he remained disappointed. He'd told friends and family about his role in the film, and now he had to explain that he didn't actually appear in the finished product. The incident was particularly painful because Reeves was in the later stages of his career and didn't receive many film offers. Work that might have provided a nice credit simply vanished. In the publicity materials and early promotional articles, his character was mentioned and his name appeared in the credits. But in the actual film, he's nowhere to be seen. Perfect work disappeared because the movie worked better without it. Number 1. The special effect that was actually an accident. The film's most iconic image, the moment when invisible creatures first reveal themselves by becoming visible, resulted from a complete accident during filming. The scene was supposed to show the creatures materializing gradually through an optical effect. Special effects supervisor Peter Nielsen had planned a careful process involving multiple exposure passes and painted mats to create a shimmering, translucent appearance before the creatures became fully solid. During the test photography, however, a technical problem occurred. The film stock Nielsen was using reacted unexpectedly to the intense lighting setup. When developed, the test footage showed the creature models appearing with a strange, pulsing quality, almost like they were throbbing or breathing. This wasn't planned. The film's chemical response to light and heat had created an organic, disturbing effect that made the models look genuinely alive in ways stop-motion animation rarely achieved. Nielsen showed the accident to director Crabtree, expecting to discuss how to fix the problem and reshoot. But Crabtree was fascinated by the strange quality. It made the creatures look unstable and wrong, like they shouldn't exist in the physical world. He asked Nielsen if he could intentionally recreate the effect. Nielsen wasn't entirely sure what had caused it, but he experimented with different film stocks, lighting intensities, and development processes. After dozens of tests, he found a combination that produced similar results consistently. The final materialization sequence uses this accidental technique. The creatures don't simply fade into view, they pulse and throb as they become visible, looking like nightmares forcing themselves into reality. The effect is deeply unsettling in ways that the originally planned smooth materialization would never have achieved. Audiences and critics singled out this sequence as particularly effective, praising the innovative visual approach. Nielsen received credit for brilliant special effects work, and he graciously accepted the compliments. But he knew the truth. His greatest achievement in the film came from a mistake he barely understood and struggled to replicate. Sometimes the best artistry comes from accidents embraced rather than errors corrected. Bonus fact: the creature model that traveled the world. After the film's release and subsequent cult following, one of the original brain creature models embarked on an unlikely journey around the world that lasted over 4 decades. The model was initially sold by effects supervisor Peter Nielsen to a British horror memorabilia collector in the 1980s. This collector, a London doctor named James Worthing, displayed the creature in his private collection for several years. When Worthing passed away in 1992, his estate auctioned his entire memorabilia collection. The brain creature was purchased by an American collector who brought it to the United States. For the next several years, the model appeared at horror conventions across America, displayed in glass cases, and occasionally brought out for photographs with fans. In 2000, the American collector sold the piece to a Japanese special effects museum in Tokyo, where it became part of a permanent exhibition on Western horror film techniques. The model remained in Tokyo for nearly a decade, educating Japanese film students about practical effects methods. When the museum closed in 2009 due to financial problems, the creature was purchased by a French film historian who specialized in science fiction cinema. She brought it to Paris, where it was featured in a touring exhibition about 1950s monster movies that traveled throughout Europe. The exhibition visited 12 countries over 3 years, and the brain creature became one of its most popular attractions. After the exhibition concluded in 2012, the model was purchased at auction by a wealthy Australian collector who'd been trying to acquire it for years. The creature now resides in a climate-controlled display case in Melbourne, having literally traveled the world. It began as a simple prop created for a few minutes of screen time in a low-budget film. It became an artifact of cinema history, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people across 5 continents. The wire, latex, and paint that once seemed disposable carried memories of 1950s creativity to new generations worldwide. One small object told the story of an entire era of filmmaking to audiences who never saw the original theatrical release. The creature that terrified audiences in 1958 now educates and inspires viewers in the 21st century. Old craft found new purpose through preservation and passion. Fiend Without a Face shows us that real creativity comes from limitations, not unlimited resources. A small team with minimal budget created something genuinely innovative by refusing to accept that low budget meant low quality. They worked longer hours, solved impossible problems, and turned accidents into advantages. The Brain creatures terrified audiences because the artists behind them cared enough to make every detail count. They built models with precision, moved them with patience, and filmed them with artistry that elevated ridiculous premises into genuine scares. Behind every effective moment was someone's hard work, someone's creative solution, someone's refusal to give up when easier paths appeared. The film reminds us that imagination matters more than money. That dedication can overcome almost any obstacle. That taking risks, showing what others only suggested, can create something that lasts far beyond its original moment. The people who made this movie weren't aiming for film history. They were solving problems, meeting deadlines, and trying to create something audiences would enjoy. But their craftsmanship and creativity resulted in something that still resonates today. Every brain creature that crawls across the screen represents hours of human effort, creativity born from challenge, and artistry disguised as entertainment. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time. Behind every image you see is a person who created it, a problem they solved, a choice that mattered. These stories deserve to be told, these artists deserve to be remembered, and these films, no matter how old or obscure, still have secrets to share with anyone willing to look closer.